The morning sun hadn't even burned through the fog when the platoon found its newest target Taria hail at 0530 hours. The training grounds were already alive with movement. Boots hammering damp soil, instructors calling cadence, and the low murmur of recruits trying to wake their bodies before the day crushed them. Arya stood among them, quiet, shoulders squared, her face unreadable. She wasn't the smallest recruit or the weakest, but she was the easiest to single out, the one who didn't brag, didn't bicker, didn't join the whispering circles forming around steaming cups of instant coffee. Silence in boot camp was a scent sharks could smell. Before we begin this mission, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because some stories of courage never made the headlines, but they deserve to be heard. Tell us where you're watching from and who's the hero in your family. Pike was the first to push it. He bumped her ruck as they lined up along the dirt track, making the straps twist off her shoulder. "Move it, Sparrow," he muttered, letting the nickname roll with mocking sweetness. A few others snickered. Arya didn't respond. She simply fixed the strap and stepped back into line. That only made Pike smirk wider. He wanted a spark so he could justify a flame. Staff SGT Vega watched all of it from behind mirrored lenses. She didn't intervene, not yet. She was gauging reactions, Arya's most of all, but her jaw tightened slightly. The only hint she noticed the imbalance forming. The platoon formed at the starting position of the obstacle course, a 400-meter low crawl through grit and loose gravel, followed by a sprint to the 2-story rope tower. LTC, MDR, Rourke, Maddox. Call sign Iron Hand oversaw the course from a raised platform, arms folded, scanning the rows with the habit of a man who had led teams in places so distant and unforgiving that these recruits had no conception of them. His gaze passed over Arya once, paused for half a heartbeat, then moved on. Nothing unusual, or so he thought. The whistle blew, bodies dropped. Gravel bit skin. The fog still clung low enough that the world felt muffled, as if wrapped in wool, and the only clarity existed in the burning effort of each pull forward. Arya moved efficiently, less frantic than the others, more controlled. She kept her elbows tight and her breathing steady. Pike crawled just ahead of her, flinging dirt backward in an intentional spray. He glanced over his shoulder with a grin, waiting for a reaction. She gave him nothing. 30 meters in, the first snag came. Arya slipped under a rusted support beam, her left sleeve catching on a sharp bolt. She felt the tug, but didn't stop. The fabric stretched, then tore with a hard rip that echoed sharper than it should have. Her skin chilled as air touched it. She kept moving, but behind her, Vega's bark cut through the fog. Arya turned her head slightly, seeing the frayed edges and the long tear running up her sleeve. And then Maddox saw it. The tattoo, barely exposed, but unmistakable. A stylized winged trident, crisp lines softened by time, and beneath it the small, narrow Cody 7 G9. Maddox's stride halted in the middle of the platform. For a second, he forgot the whistle in his hand. His expression didn't break for the recruits, but something inside him snapped to full alert. That symbol wasn't standard Navy, wasn't Marine, wasn't any public unit. It belonged to a program the military didn't acknowledge anymore, if it ever had. A program associated with rescue operations so classified that even rumors were discouraged. Iron Hand copy movement on Lane 3 drifted through the radios around him. But Maddox didn't answer. He was staring at that faded mark like a man seeing a ghost crawling through the dirt. Arya realized what he'd seen. Her pace quickened, not out of panic, but out of instinct. She needed the sleeve closed, the course finished, the attention moved elsewhere. But it was too late. Pike, noticing Maddox's stare, rolled to the side to get a better look. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, eyes widening. He hadn't expected anything interesting. Now he had a weapon. The squad reached the end of the crawl and pushed into the sprint. Arya kept her torn sleeve tucked against her body, but whispers had already begun. "Sparrow's got a secret. Did you see that ink? Looks military. Looks dangerous." The rope tower loomed. Arya climbed with precise foot placement, ascending faster than recruits twice her strength. Pike followed below her, throwing another jab. "What kind of recruit shows up inked like that? You trying to play operator?" For the first time, Arya looked down at him. Her gaze wasn't angry. It was colder, like she was calculating something he wouldn't understand. That unsettled him more than any insult. Vega met them at the base of the tower. She gave Arya a long look, slower and more analytical than usual. "Get that sleeve patched," she said, voice flat, but her eyes flicked to the tattoo before she turned away. Respect, maybe, or the first hint of unease. The course ended with a formation jog around the perimeter. Arya ran silently, her arm pressed close to hide the tear. The fog had lifted by then, revealing the full sprawl of the compound track lanes. Firing pits, barracks, towers, all bathed in the harsh clarity of the rising sun. Maddox descended from the platform and strode toward the admin office without a word to anyone. The whistle hung unused in his grip. Inside that office, he locked the door and pulled a secure tablet from a drawer. His fingers hovered for a moment before typing a request for restricted files. Not a name, just the symbol, just the code. A search like that had implications. It meant he suspected something significant, something that didn't belong in a basic training cycle. He hesitated, wrestling with a sense that he was about to pull old shadows into daylight. Then he hit submit. Outside, the recruits cooled down in loose clusters. Some watched Arya warily, some avoided meeting her eyes. Pike paced in front of his friends, exaggerating the story already, claiming he knew exactly where the tattoo came from. They laughed nervously, but no one really believed him. They weren't mocking her anymore. They were trying to convince themselves she wasn't something unknown. Arya sat alone on the edge of the bleachers, working needle and thread through the torn sleeve. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm, but her eyes drifted toward the admin building, where Maddox had disappeared. She knew what he had seen. She knew what he might do next. The past she never intended to bring here had just been dragged into the open, and the day had barely started. When Maddox finally stepped out, his face was unreadable, but his stare found Arya across the field. He didn't call her name. He didn't approach. He only watched, as though trying to reconcile the quiet recruit with the impossibility of the mark she carried. By noon, the fog was gone, but a new kind of cloud hung over the platoon, one built from rumor and suspicion. And from a single unanswered question, none of them dared say aloud. And by nightfall, Maddox's request for information would return with a single line of redacted text that would make him look at Arya Hale not as a recruit, but as a mystery he needed to unravel. The next day would begin with whispers of a unit that wasn't supposed to exist. Night dropped hard over the compound, bringing whispers with "It who is she really?" Red lights replaced daylight discipline. Recruits checked gear for the night navigation course, but every conversation drifted back to Arya Hale. Unease for some, fascination for others, and for Pike hostility sharpened to a point. From the parade ground, Maddox watched in silence. The classified response in his pocket felt heavier each time he touched it. Unit E7, G9, dissolved. A ghost unit, a mark no recruit should wear. Keller joined him quietly. That symbol, I've only seen it once. File was mostly blacked out, listed under rescues, a unit that never officially existed. That's what I was afraid of, Maddox muttered. They both looked toward Arya as she adjusted her headlamp strap expression.com, unreadable in the red glow. When navigation began, teams staggered into the woods on 3-kilometer routes. Arya, unlucky in roster order, ended up with Pike's group. Under red light discipline, faces were blurred halos, but Pike's scowl needed no illumination. He slid close, voice low and taunting. You hiding something, Sparrow? He flicked her compass to spoil the reading. Ink like that doesn't smell like a recruit. Arya corrected course without flinching. Stay on azimuth 1A2. We're drifting. Don't tell me how to navigate a course, Sparrow. His tone was sharp, brittle, desperate for dominance. She kept walking, unbothered. Pike stepped in front of her abruptly, making her stop short. His shadow warped in the red light, shoulders squared. Tension tightened the earthen electric. For a second, Arya's posture shifted with alarming precision, like muscle memory from a different life was ready to ignite. Vega's distant whistle cut through the trees, pulling them apart before anything could happen. The teams completed the course over the next hour, Arya's arriving first, despite Pike's obstruction. Vega checked her sheet, eyebrows lifting. Good work, she said simply, handing it back. It wasn't praise Vega didn't give praise, but it was the first crack in the armor of suspicion surrounding Arya. Training intensified the next morning. Endurance drills, wall climbs, sprint relays under rising heat. Recruits frayed at the edges, but Arya stayed steady, methodical, always near the front. The whispers shifted those who mocked her. Now avoided getting too close. By midday, Maddox called her aside near the gear shed. That tattoo, he said bluntly. Where did you get it? It's not relevant to my training, sir. It's entirely relevant. Units tied to that insignia ran operations most people think never happened. Arya held his stare. I have nothing to disclose. He saw it then not defiance, but protection of what he couldn't tell. Before he pressed further, the compound alarm blared the live fire simulation. Maddox nodded her away. We're not done. At the range, recruits received suppressed M4 South and instructions for reactive steel targets at 25 to 50 meters. Blank fire grenades mimicked incoming fire. Maddox and Keller observed from above, tracking muzzle discipline. The run began. Arya moved with calm precision. Pike crowded her flank, trying to throw her off. Suppressed shots clattered against Steelin till a faint metallic click cut through the noise. Right side, she whispered. Weapon jam. Another click-wrong cadence. Arya shoved 2 recruits aside, sprinted, grabbed the sideways-emmed M249 trainer, and locked the safety. Maddox descended, stunned. How did you hear that? Sound signatures, sir. That wasn't in the briefing. I know. Maddox studied her, not with suspicion this time, but with something closer to awe. Knowledge like that wasn't learned in classrooms. It was earned somewhere dangerous. As the recruits filed out, whispers followed Arya again, but they had changed shape entirely. No longer mocking, no longer doubtful. This time they were edged with respect and fear of the unknown. Maddox remained behind, turning over the implications with growing urgency. The unit that didn't exist suddenly felt close enough to touch, and Arya Hale stood at the center of it like a question he could no longer ignore. and the next test would reveal just how much of her past still lived beneath the surface. The crucible began before dawn, but Arya walked into it like someone who had survived far darker places. The air was cold enough to sting, and the training grounds stretched into a bleak maze of ridgelines, sand pits, and forced march trails marked with faded glow tape. 40-pound rucks waited on the gravel, lined up like silent judges. The recruits gathered in a loose formation, exhausted, jittery, and pretending not to glance at the one person who never broke pace, never broke silence. Arya slid her shoulders beneath the straps of her ruck. The weight settled against her spine with familiar finality, as if welcoming her back. She didn't react when Pike drifted past her, his smirk thin and satisfied. Only when she lifted the pack did she feel Itha imbalance, too light in one corner, too heavy in another. Something shifted inside like a sack of sand had been deliberately moved. Sabotage. His style, she tightened her grip but said nothing. The crucible was built to punish weakness, and calling out Pike now would only make her a target twice over. Instead, she locked eyes with him for a heartbeat. He expected the look of someone about to break. Instead, he got something cold, unreadable, and unshaken. Pike's smirk faltered. Maddox moved down the line, checking straps, measuring stamina in the set of shoulders and the tremor of knees. He paused briefly at Arya, his gaze flicking to the uneven ruck, then to her face. She held his stare. He gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, and moved on. If he suspected something, he wasn't intervening, not unless the crucible demanded it. The first 5 kilometers dragged the platoon across a terrain of loose shale and steep climbs. Some recruits stumbled early. Others leaned too hard on their trekking poles. Arya, despite the sabotaged load, kept pace. Each step drove the weight deeper into her hips, grinding muscle against bone, but she steadied her breathing and forced her stride into rhythm. Her body remembered. It always remembered. By the second checkpoint, sunlight filtered through a washed-out sky, bleaching the world into a soft haze. The platoon's chatter faded. Even Pike stopped trying to provoke her. They had all entered the same quiet space, the place where exhaustion stripped away bravado and left only the core of who you were. Just past the 10th kilometer, the illusion of routine shattered. A thudding crack split the air. The ground trembled hard enough to kick dust from boots. A plume of smoke rose from range echo, curling upward in frantic spirals. Maddox turned instantly toward the source, eyes tracking the distance, analyzing angles, calculating possibilities. Another instructor sprinted toward him, shouting that a training charge had misfired during a demo run. 2 recruits were down. For a moment, everyone froze. Arya did not. She dropped her ruck in a single motion and ran. Maddox shouted for her to hold position, but the wind stole the order, and she was already cresting the first ridge. Her strides were sharp, efficient, almost mechanical. The terrain blurred beneath her feet in a way no recruit should have been capable of. She slid down the far embankment and reached the smoke-thick clearing where 2 recruits lay sprawled beside a shattered training charge. One clutched his leg, blood seeping through his pant leg. The other drifted in and out of consciousness, pale and shaking. Arya knelt beside them and assessed in seconds. Leg wound, arterial risk. Consciousness, fade possible blast over pressure. She tore strips from her own shirt sleeve and twisted them into an improvised tourniquet, cinching it tight above the injury. The recruit hissed in pain, but steadied. She tilted the second recruit's chin, checking his airway, gauging his breathing, shielding his eyes from the grit swirling through the clearing. Behind her, the rest of the platoon arrived in ragged groups. Maddox was first among them. He watched her work with a dawning realization, as if witnessing a memory he wasn't prepared to relive. Arya reached for the radio unit clipped to the demolished demo kit. She keyed it cleanly, her voice steady and controlled. "Alpha Team, Break 9 line, medevac, incoming." Arya relayed grid coordinates, injury types, and priority codes with a precision no recruit should possess. Maddox stepped closer, recognizing the cadence of someone trained for extractions under fire. She ended with, "Visibility, good. Crosswind 12 knots west," then switched channels to mark smoke for the incoming bird. She grabbed a smoke canister, paused, read the wind instantly, stepped into it, and launched a perfect plume-clean stable, unmistakable. Even Maddox wouldn't have calculated that fast. The helo thundered overhead. Rotor wash flattened the clearing as medics fast-roped in. They echoed her assessments word for word. No corrections, no uncertainty. Her work was flawless. When the aircraft lifted off with the casualties, silence returned. Maddox approached. Dust streaked her face, but her eyes were steady to steady. "Arya, that call you made, that wasn't basic pipeline training." She didn't reply. "And you're to E7, G9. I know what that means." A flicker in her jaw. "Does it matter?" "It does. Units like that weren't supposed to exist. If you came from one, why are you here?" She exhaled. "I'm done being a ghost." Maddox's sternness eased. "Then you're fit for any unit, and I'll put that in writing." For the first time since she'd arrived at boot camp, Arya exhaled, not out of discipline, but out of release. The crucible had stripped everyone down. For her, it had revealed the truth she'd been carrying for years. And yet she knew this was only the beginning, because missions like hers never truly ended, and the world outside the wire was already shifting toward whatever came next.